I'm so excited today that we'll be talking about facts and myths about non-monogamous relationships with my special guests, Kelly Benzin and Brittani Decess, who are a social worker and a licensed professional counselor. And we're going to be getting into all sorts of interesting topics, including people navigating non-monogamous relationships, intersectional lenses and cultural bias, what does society in the United States think about these things. We're actually also going to be introducing at the end a relationship program available for non-monogamous folks as well. So first of all, before we jump into this, let's have the therapist guests introduce themselves. So Brittani Decess, LPC, can you tell us about yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, Paul, and all the listeners. Thanks for having me. My name is Brittani. My pronouns are she, her. I am a queer cisgendered female. I have been working at Health for Life now for roughly 2.5 years. And I have a bachelor's degree in art therapy and a master's in counseling education with an emphasis on marriage, couples, and families. Some of the things that really get me jiving and the things that geek me out and I specialize in. So firstly, I'm a trauma-informed therapist. And so the things that I specialize in that regard are anxiety, depression, domestic violence, sexual assault and abuse, and neglect. And then where I really get to geek out and what's really bucket filling for me are couples, families, relationship dynamics, LGBTQ plus experiences, sexuality, intimacy, kink, and non-monogamy. So I'm really excited to talk today, Paul. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And we also have Kelly Benzin, licensed master of social work. Can you tell us about yourself, Kelly?
I feel like Brittany said so much and I'm not, that prepared on that whole spiel. My name is Kelly. My pronouns are she, her. I have been a therapist since 2018 in some regard or another. I currently focus on working with women primarily. I practice a lot from feminist theory perspective. So talking about intersectionality and things like that, power and control and dynamics of being a female-bodied person or a female-presenting person in our society. I also work a lot with complex trauma cases. It's just something that I'm really passionate about, helping people work through the trauma of living in this world. I am also a practicing non-monogamist. So that is what brought me to being on this podcast today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, both of you. And I'm excited to get into a lot of the questions. So I'm going to probably ask some questions, and then I'm also going to give space for not only answers, but dialogue. So as the podcast host, I'm still learning about non-monogamous relationships and all the terminology, but I figured after talking to you both, let's start with some myths and facts. So Brittany is probably going to help me out here a little bit with asking Kelly some of these questions, as Kelly is, out of the three of us, definitely the expert here. And so one of the ones that I hear a lot when I hear people talk about this, and usually accompanied with a little bit of an eye roll, isn't this just all about sex? Isn't this what these folks in non-monogamous relationships are up to?
I love that one. I do want to start by saying that I am practicing polyamory, but I am not necessarily an expert. There's a ton of people out there who know lots of things that I don't yet. This is a continuous learning process for me. So I just want to make it clear that this is my perspective on things. Other people may have differing opinions on certain things that we might talk about. Non-monogamy in general, I like to jokingly call it a choose your own adventure relationship. So a lot of times we try to generalize answers for things, right? Like there's going to be questions that come up that I'm going to just kind of give a general answer about, but that may not pertain to each individual relationship or polycule or whatever we're speaking about. As far as the it's all about sex myth, love this one because it is one of the top things that I hear. And we were just joking when we were talking in prep about how, because there are more people involved in relationships, that it does have that opportunity for it to be more sexual. And there are certain styles of non-monogamy that could be more sex-based, but that's not always the case. And talking about it just being about sex is really minimizing to a lot of the relationship dynamics that are out there. So I identify as polyamorous, which means that I want to have multiple romantic, loving relationships with people. So that doesn't always mean that it's sex-based. A lot of people that are polyamorous have, different kinds of partners, like play partners, somebody that you just connect with in a sexual way, platonic partners who are not necessarily romantic and are just elevated friendships, really. There's all these different dynamics, but it doesn't all end up being just about sex.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think oftentimes when we don't know about something, we sort of just make assumptions as people. And so I think to dig in further, there's a lot of different ways to go about this. Like you said, like there's other experts in the field. You're, learning as you go, and you've been reading and researching all of this. So I feel like that is a myth. What do you think, Brittani?
That it's all about sex all the time? Absolutely. I mean, even our monogamous folks, the couples I see, a lot of times they're coming to me because they also want to have more sex and are not. And I mean, Kelly can say this is a myth or a fact, but I would also think that if you have more than one person, trying to schedule time, trying to figure out when you're doing what with who gets really challenging. And so I would figure that even trying to have sex becomes more challenging.
There is a common joke in the non-monogamous community about our obsession with scheduling, that we're just actually really planner obsessed because we have to, everybody's got a shared Google Calendar, right? Like, you need to know when you're spending time with who or whatever, but also there is a good portion of my non-monogamy that is a lot of me time. I'm not a person who wants to spend 24/7 with a partner. I've got work. I've got a kid. I like being by myself. I'm a really introverted person. So going out and being really picking up people at bars is just not a part of what my non-monogamy looks like. For some people it is, and that's totally cool. This is all, relationships based on designs for the needs of the people in them.
Oh, I like that. So you've dropped some knowledge about some of the things I was going to ask about later, which I like. We're going to call back to that, maybe kind of some of the purposes of why people get into non-monogamous relationships. For the listeners at home, we're going to go to another myth or fact. Are people in non-monogamous relationships jealous all the time?
So I think that part of the problem with this myth is that as a society, we label jealousy as a negative emotion, right? And as a therapist, I'm sure both of you agree that there is no such thing as a positive or a negative, or like a good or a bad emotion. They're all just signals telling us something. So some people don't get jealous at all. Some people get a little jealous based on given circumstances or situations. A lot of times our culture also sees jealousy as a sign of love. Like if you're in a monogamous relationship and your partner is jealous, we get taught that that means that they love us. And that's not necessarily a great indicator. So in non-monogamy, we do have partners that spend time with other partners, right? So there is those kind of compulsory mononormative thoughts of like, oh, this person's going to steal away my partner, or my partner is going to like this person more. And that's just not really what we're trying to do. Like the resources of love are not finite. So if my partner spends time with one of his other partners, it doesn't I can get those jealous, we call them bubbles in my polycule. I get bubbly, but I also thoroughly am happy that he is out spending time with someone who also makes him happy. So a term in the non-monogamous community is compersion, right? Which is the opposite of jealousy. So compersion is the feeling joy because your partner is feeling joy. And that is a struggle for a lot of people. A lot of us do spend a good chunk of time jealous, but it's always a signal to look in and see what we're actually feeling. I would say that, based on the circumstance, there are things that do make me get a little bubbly. There are things that don't. And it really depends on the people, but it's just such a vilified word, right? Like, it is very loaded.
Mm-hmm. I think you made a really good comment there, Kelly, about jealousy is a signal to look deeper, because I often think that jealousy is a guard dog to a more vulnerable or softer emotion. And so I think you saying that was just wonderful.
Thank you. It's also just part of like, when we talk about non-monogamy, there's no way of having this conversation without talking about the incredible amount of communication that goes into relationships. And it tends to not be a thing that non-monogamous people shy away from. We have conversations openly about, I'm feeling a little bubbly today. It's about this. Can we talk about this? There is a lot of freedom to have those conversations, to minimize those bubble feelings, those jealousy feelings, to even like suss out if it is jealousy, if it's envy, if it's just I'm not getting a need met, and how do I find that need from somewhere else? It's a lot of open communication. Anyways, to get back to the myth, I don't think that we spend all of our time just being jealous.
I would agree based on what I've heard. And also, obviously, it sounds like what I'm already hearing, which I'm going to get to later, is that being in a non-monogamous relationship is something that people should not go into if they're expecting things to be easy. This is a relationship that's going to make you want to be able to do more self-work. You're going to need to do more communication work, and you're going to need to be more self-aware, possibly, than you may if you just have one partner and you have this sort of routine or something. That might be an assumption on my part, but thoughts?
No, I would wholeheartedly agree. But I don't think that that's something that you couldn't do in monogamy.
Sure.
At some point, I'm going to bring up relationship anarchy and talk about that a little bit, but it is the intentionality. So non-monogamous relationships put a lot of emphasis on intentionality. We are creating connections with people and having to be very open, honest, and communicative. And that also includes vulnerability. If you think about going into a non-monogamous relationship or starting to practice non-monogamy and think that there isn't a lot of self-growth and introspection that's going to happen, that's not a thing. When I started this journey, it was a ton of research. And that research led to me really looking into a lot of the mononormative beliefs and systems that I withheld in myself and having to grow out of them. Being open and honest with people to an extent that we tend to be, at least in my relationships, is really tough work. It's also incredibly rewarding because you have those deeper, intimate connections. But yeah, if I thought that this was just going to be a walk in the park, I was sorely mistaken.
Very good. And yes, of course, in a relationship of monogamy, you can of course go deeper and work on those things. It's just that our society that's sort of the norm. Like you said, mononormative is sort of the norm in the United States for relationships, and thus there's a lot of built-in scripts and built-in assumptions that happen. And obviously, if you're outside of that, it's like a large challenge. Obviously, I think any relationship is a challenge. And in the counseling clinic at Health for Life Counseling in Grand Rapids, and every counseling clinic I've worked in, a lot of people's complaints have at least some flavor of a relationship being involved, either the lack of a relationship, the type of a relationship, that the possibly coming out of an abusive relationship, the relationship they're in right now, the relationship they wish they had. These are parts of us that really get that are important to people to have a relationship or relationships that have a balance to them to some extent, right? They're not just like, I'm all giving or I'm only taking or whatever. I'm going very large into the macro for a second, but just sort of explaining like this is, going into what you did to non-monogamy is a challenge, I think, to really have to communicate because you've got more than one person involved. So I think that's a good one. I think we covered it. Brittani, any thoughts on that? Or Kelly?
I always tell the people that I work with that if they're thinking about opening up their relationship or thinking about non-monogamy and all of its umbrellas of if you are having problems communicating in a primary relationship and you're thinking about participating in non-monogamy, that is going to be a detriment in all of your other relationships. And even if we don't think about romantic or sexual relationships, if you are having difficulty communicating with one person, you are also probably having difficulty communicating with all people in your life, from bosses to children to teachers to friends. So I think people don't realize sometimes how complicated learning how to communicate actually is.
I love that you brought that up, Brittani, because that's a thing that a lot of non-monogamous educators talk about is the before you open or before you decide to start on a non-monogamous journey is have you experienced one healthy relationship? Can you have one healthy relationship before you consider bringing in other partners, whatever shape, form that looks like? But you need to be able to have one healthy relationship before you can have multiple healthy relationships. And so really digging into those tools to learn how to have one healthy relationship is really important.
Mm-hmm. So then with that, I think of all relationships. That's kind of my viewpoint. And so myth or fact, Kelly, do non-monogamous people think about kids? Do they have kids? Is non-monogamy safe for kids? Like how do non-monogamous folks have families? Myth or fact? No kids?
Definitely myth. Totally a possibility of having children. I have a daughter. She is older. She's in her late teens, so it's not really as much of an issue for me. My partner does not have kids, but I follow lots of people on Instagram that have kids and are in non-monogamous relationships. I think that one of the kind of values and benefits to raising kids in a non-monogamous structure is that sense of community. There are always extra people around to help with childcare. We as a society have become so focused on that nuclear family and forgotten that there is, that it takes a village. And I don't love that I just quoted that, but here we are. It does. We need people to help raise kids. And I don't see a problem ever with a kid having more love or more support. That just isn't something that I think is bad, right? Like we want kids to be well loved and well supported. And there definitely is the ability to do that in polyamorous and non-monogamous relationships. There are a lot of people, this isn't an area that I'm super well versed in because that's just not, like I said, my child's older. But there are a lot of resources for non-monogamy and parenting that are popping up lately. And it's really great to see. The idea that you could raise a kiddo in an environment with an abundance of love, but also providing them the tips and tricks and tools of like, not all relationships look like that nuclear family. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to create really nice little humans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that sounds like a great answer to that. And I think you're getting into the nuances because it really depends how the structure is set up and all of that. But it sounds like there's plenty of people that are doing it. And on the opposite side, we have seen an epidemic of people who have felt isolated, especially since COVID-19. But even before then, I think there was a huge loneliness crisis going on. And in that, when you have a parent who's already feeling isolated and then you have kids, right? That kid may not be learning the skills of getting involved in socialization. They may not have the resources. They can't obviously, usually, unless they're 16, drive themselves around, right? They may not understand how to navigate the city. So anyway, just putting it out there that having more people that are safe couldn't hurt.
Yeah. Well, we used to raise kiddos in communities. There was more community involvement. Just the idea that, like, if I had to bring my daughter to a doctor's appointment, but had a work conflict, that I could call one of multiple partners and see if they were able to help me out in that situation, or my metamors, which are the partners of my partners. More community just equals more love to me.
That's beautiful.
Good.
Thanks.
And this is good. We're getting in, before we get into the meat of kind of like what it's all about, Brittani and I are going to ask a few more myth versus fact questions. This one is kind of mean, but I've heard this sort of idea of like that people that may be in a non-monogamous relationship could just be all about them. And it's like, I need you for this. And you're the lawn mower, you're the ice cream maker, you're the one who helps with the house, you're the lover. Like, it's all about, like, not to say narcissism, it's so overused, but just that whole idea. Can you respond to that? I think
so. I have some mixed feelings on this, because on one hand, I think that we don't put enough priority on ourselves in relationships, that we have wants and needs that we should be able to get met somehow, as long as they are, not anything that's going to harm other people. Like the fact that I want a partner to watch scary movies with me, right? Like, we have this opportunity to have people who kind of, let me think how to put this. You have friends for different reasons. If you have like a buddy that you go do certain activities with. So yeah, we have friends for different needs, right? What is the difference in having a partner for a different need? On the other hand, I also don't think that people are necessarily need fulfilling machines. So if there is a need that one of my partners can't meet, I'm not going to go out and specifically search for someone, that to find that scary movie partner, right? Like, I'm going to have a connection with a person. And if they do happen to have that thing, great, cool. But like, I'm not hunting for my needs to be met. I also have other resources for getting my needs met. I have my friends, I have my family, I have myself. Our partners don't always have to be everything for us. And that is a big component of how I practice. My partner is not everything to me, nor I need to be everything for them. That's just unrealistic to me. Have other options for resources. I also totally think that we should be a bit more selfish.
Could you define what you mean by that? Could you define that just for people out there that are triggered by that word?
I think that it is one of those things that we are taught, and this is definitely throwing in my feminist theory perspective. I think that it's one of those things that we were taught is bad. And in the rise of people focusing on self-care, and just the fact that they have to define that self-care is not selfish. Taking care of ourselves is seen as this bad thing. It is villainized. We are supposed to care for other people, particularly as a woman. I have been taught from a very young age that I need to care for other people and not necessarily care for myself. I need to prioritize other people over myself. And in my non-monogamy journey, I have realized that I can take care of myself, and it's actually better. I can love on my partners in ways that they need to be loved on because I've already done my own work, because I've got my needs met. So I have more to give. So that's what I think about the word selfish. It's banned from my sessions. My clients are not allowed to say that they feel selfish.
Oh,
I was going
like
to say,
that.
have you also been in my sessions? Because I always tell female presenting people and femmes, like, self-care is the most selfless thing you can do, because if you're filling your own bucket, if you're taking care of yourself, then you have more to give to everybody else. Are we therapizing the same people?
Probably. It's the same community.
Well, and I think just overall in the United States, we have an emphasis on production. We have an emphasis on gain. We have this idea of like unlimited gain. Keep doing more and more and more. That's like kind of baked into our economic system, but also it's baked into schools and it's baked into workplaces. And there's very few workplaces or schools that basically, I think, kind of have you question what you're doing with your time. They kind of all have an answer for what you should be doing with your time. And then when you bring that into the relationship, we could go into the cultural nuances of the relationships, which is a whole sociology lesson of the last couple of 100 years, especially female presenting people have been expected to do certain roles, and male presenting people but expected to do other roles. And I would say it's definitely been misbalanced. But I would say on both sides, even, it's just like neglect your needs, do this. And then we wonder why people are resentful and upset and angry and stressed out and all of these things, versus like learn to take care of yourself so you aren't putting it all on another person, or in this podcast, multiple people, right? So that you can then be a better partner or whatever or parent or friend to other people, because you're not just like desperately trying to get everything from the external realm, right?
Yeah, we've so gotten taught and ingrained in us this idea that your partner, your one other person in a monogamous relationship, is your everything. That's a really high expectation to live up to. Like, the pressure of constantly having to be everything to a person is just, it's unrealistic and it sounds exhausting. And then we have relationships that fail because, oh, my partner wasn't meeting my needs, right? And it's like, well, there's a different way to look at that. And that's a thing that is commonly talked about in non-monogamy, is different ways of getting needs met without using people as need-fulfilling machines.
Love it. I think you've answered that question. And I think as a group, I feel good about that being a myth. Obviously, like anything, non-monogamous, terminology can be misused by certain folks to get their needs met, but that obviously is not what we're talking about, because anything can be misused. Any relationship can be misused, right? It's about what's actually going on with the individual. So, Brittani, I know you had another myth you wanted to ask about.
Yeah, so something that, as I'm scrolling on TikTok or things, and even though I may already know the answer to this, my myth or fact is this only a young people thing, or only the millennials and zennials doing this? This being non-monogamy?
Didn't we answer this already?
We were joking about it when we were prepping, but let's tell the world like what we discussed, man. Like, are only the 20-somethings doing it, bro?
Okay, so for starters, no. I am in my 40s. My anchor partner is in his 50s. My previous partner is in her late 40s. We're not little Gen Zers. But I think that the kids, wow, that made me sound really old. I'm sorry. Anyways, the kiddos are all right. Like, they are growing up where this is something that is being talked about, that they are recognizing that they have more options. I also think, and I love them dearly for this, but a lot of them are fighting against a lot of cultural norms and figuring out things that have always happened, don't need to always happen, and may not have always been the right thing to happen. And I think that just provides a lot more open-mindedness. I think that is something that is making people really explore why we have relationships in the way that we do. I know for me, part of my coming to non-monogamy was really looking at why we do relationships the way that we do and how that really felt limiting to me. I think that this younger generation really has more options. They're seeing non-monogamous relationships. And granted, as something that we've talked about, just personally, is that those are not always great representations in media. But at least kiddos know it's an option. For me, non-monogamy was never an option. It was never something that I'd heard about until I was much older. So the first time that I heard about polyamorous people outside of, something that I'm sure we'll touch on later, like the standard cultural, like religious reasons of polygamy and things like that. But it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I had any idea that there were people. And even then it was some shady website. And it was like, this is really dating me here, but like some WordPress website. And it was very hush hush. It was seen as something that was taboo, right? And I think now the resources are out there so much more that the kiddos, the younger generation, and they just have the ability to access that info in a way that we didn't primarily. So, and yeah, they're also a lot more out and proud about it.
Mm-hmm. I think that that last part you said, I'm also seeing a little bit of similarities between the kink community and the LGBTQIA plus community. They didn't have our elders in those communities didn't have the resources, the networking, the, dare I even say, access or marketing to finding people that would help them navigate those things safely. And I feel like you're kind of saying the same thing about folks who are participating in non-monogamy.
Well, there's definitely some overlap between those communities, right? Like, I think that one of the benefits of the non-monogamous community is that it does branch into other areas. It's not just for this one type of population kind of idea. It is something that, as it becomes more normalized, more talked about, may provide space for people to really be able to authentically express themselves. Like I said earlier, these are kind of choose your own adventure relationship styles, and we're building relationships based on the needs of the people in them. So we can critique, I think, all of this heteronormative, mononormative, very traditional, quote unquote, based relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is part of human evolution as we are right in the middle, right in the beginning of the internet age. We seem to think we're not, because they're like, oh, it was invented in the 1980s. And okay, we're still, if you look at the whole of human history, we're in the infancy of the internet. And what I'm noticing is the ability for young people to get information that I didn't have until I was older. Alternative sources of information, people's actual stories about their lives, like people putting out on blogs and Medium and social media and these writing platforms. And this is, in a way, it's almost as if, I've said this before in other podcasts, so sorry if you heard this, but it's like the printing press, right? It let people who wouldn't normally be able to read have access to literature. And now we have access to people's stories. We have access to what's really going on without this sort of like, as much of this sort of, I mean, there's still this cultural like gloss on everything people put, but there, if you really look, you'll find sources of information and people's stories that might be inspiring to you. And the young people are really deconstructing a lot of things. And I think it's for our betterment, deconstructing systems, deconstructing sexuality, deconstructing relationships, deconstructing work. Why don't we have, all these studies on the 4-day work week? That wouldn't have happened 20 years ago if it wasn't for the proliferation of information. all sorts of things are, I think, going to come out of this that are good. But I think in the meantime, the older generations and maybe some people that love the status quo are a little bit bewildered by this. But I think that I've been thinking about this. Like, I mean, I think this is just part of a natural evolution that this occurs with some people. This is working for them. And especially right now with the lack of economic resources, I mean, being in a non-monogamous relationship may be even beneficial on a number of other levels that could be supportive. Or the principles, even if you're not in a non-monogamous relationship, the principles of the ideas of communication and sharing could be brought into other folks who aren't even in those relationships. So I actually see that as, like you said, it's not just for young people. The young people are into it right now more because it's available. It's because it's an option, whereas a lot of us were indoctrinated that this was never an option. Only, illegal communities in Utah and southern Colorado involved in the Mormons, the fundamentalist Mormon community were doing this, right? So there's a lot of, I think, new information coming out. Any comments on that?
I think it's also really important to note that this conversation, I'm just speaking strictly like American United States society, because non-monogamy has been practiced forever, right? It's just that we have language now about how to refer to it. And it's something that it's kind of a radical act, right? Like, personal is political in so many different areas of my life. And I think that trying to go outside of these systems, of these things, of the status quo and the way that we were raised, and really, like you said, Paul, deconstructing relationships. That is one of the things about relationship anarchy that really appeals to me, is that it is deconstructing. It's deconstructing compulsory monogamy. It's deconstructing what friendships and romantic relationships look like, why we as a society center romantic relationships and kind of hold them above friendships or familial relationships. And all of that stuff has been a really great learning process that I wish I would have had the internet to start doing when I was in my early 20s.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Brittani.
Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, no. I was just transitioning to my next question. You go. You got comments.
Well, great. I was also going to ask a question.
You were going to ask a question? What was your question? Let's go with your question.
Hey, well, I was thinking about, okay, if this is the first tipping toes for someone who is listening on non-monogamy, I think about my limited worldview before a couple years ago, and I was used to the words either polygamy or polyamory. And so, Kelly, I'm wondering if you could maybe define the difference between polygamy, polyamory, and non-monogamy, which is the word we have been using the most today.
Okay, so this one's going to be fun. So polygamy and polyamory are a component. They are options in non-monogamy. Non-monogamy is kind of the umbrella term for any sort of non-monogamous relationship. I don't know why I said it like that. That was ridiculous. But anyways, so things like open relationships, which are people that are in a couple who have extenuating circumstances to go out and have, some sort of sexual connection with another person. Swingers, totally a non-monogamy option. And those are primarily couples who go out and, have to swinger parties, or they engage in sex acts with other couples. And of course, again, these are very general definitions of these things too. There are way more nuances to all of this. Polyamory is going out and having multiple romantic connections with other people. Polygamy does get a bad rap because of the historical precedent that those types of religions have kind of held, because it hasn't always been entirely consensual. Polygamy is essentially, it's just multiple people in a marriage, right? And multiple women in a marriage. It is a viable form of non-monogamy, just because of the bad implications of what that has looked like traditionally doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a viable option for people. And I think that that is a big thing, is that, so we normally talk about consensual non-monogamy or ethical non-monogamy, right? And I prefer just saying non-monogamy because we don't have to make that qualifier when we're talking about monogamy. It's already implied that it's consensual, that it's ethical, right? And I don't love that we have to qualify that for non-monogamy, but we do. And the debate over whether it's ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy, one thing about non-monogamous, we really like making up words and calling things, renaming things. So it doesn't really, I believe all polyamory, all non-monogamy should be ethical and consensual, obviously. Don't feel like it needs to be stated.
Sometimes I feel old when I am researching things about non-monogamy. If there's a new book published and I'm like, oh, there's another term, just like, our Gen Alphas always have new terms. Like, I start feeling really old really fast because the lingo changes so quick.
It does. And that's been difficult to keep up with. And it's honestly, there's been some times where I'm like, I don't love that phrase. I don't think that is, I don't like it. It just, my partners and I on a group text one day, we were debating the term lap sitting. I had found it on a pretty prominent non-monogamous educator page. And it was this idea that your partner has a partner that you're also partnered with, which I know I need to make maps or something. This is hard to describe verbally and not like show you the connections, but it made it sound like that person was a temporary thing, or that like that person's just kind of passing through, or is a property. Like, I get her now, or he gets her now. And it just really didn't hit for any of us in our polycule, even though that was essentially what was happening at the time. Is that my partner, I had two partners, and they had a more casual connection, but they were still considered partnered. So there was multiple dynamics to that triad, and it wasn't a throuple because we were not all simultaneously dating each other. It was 3 different iterations of relationships, right? And so lap sitting was a phrase that just didn't hit well. A lot of the lingo is just interchangeable. I mean, we talk about kitchen table polyamory, which is the idea that you, your partners, your metamors can all sit around a table and have a nice dinner together. Everybody's friendly enough, you're connected enough that it's cool and comfortable. And we joke, my partner and I joke, that it's board game table polyamory, and not kitchen table, because you should have asked me that one. That's a truth, that everyone that is polyamorous is really into board games.
I would say everyone who is non-monogamous is also our dorks in some way.
Oh yeah. There is a high prevalence of nerds in our community, which is wonderful for me. But yeah, there are these constant shifting terms of what is what, and it's because there's always going to be some nuance that also wants its own label, or it just helps us better communicate like what our expectations are, like what we're looking for. So like if I were to go out and be, possibly connecting with someone and getting to that point where we're talking about like what being in a relationship looks like, I would flat out tell them, like, I am a relationship anarchist. I practice kitchen table polyamory. That's my preferred style. If that's differing, we can have that conversation, because there are other options to that. And just because that's another thing, like just because what I'm looking for doesn't entirely align with another person doesn't mean that they aren't compatible. Whereas like if you have a monogamous person and they're like, oh, I'm monogamous and you're not monogamous, that's not going to mesh. But non-monogamy can look so many different ways that there's still possible for connection there. And I just went way off tangent. I don't know what that was.
Well, no, this is good because I actually wanted to ask more about terms.
Okay.
How long has polyamory been like a big term in the United States to your knowledge?
So I recently read something that, and I cannot for the life of me remember what, so I'm stealing this, that the term polyamory didn't actually show up in anything like formally written until the 1990s. I really wish I could remember what book that was in, but like I was saying earlier, there's always been different forms of non-monogamy throughout different cultures. But I don't think I don't think it's fair to say that, polyamory has only started since 1990, right?
Oh, no. Just the term in our common nomenclature, and also metamor. This is because we know what partners are and relationships, but what is metamor for the audience?
So a metamor is the partner of your partner. So anyone that my partners are dating are my metamors. And those, like, my connection to those people can look completely different depending on the person, right? Like, I have a metamor that I chit-chat to sporadically. Like, we text, we check in, we say, hey, we are friendly. We could totally go out for a drink together. That would be lovely. I've also previously had partners that wanted to not have any interaction with me. They wanted to practice parallel polyamory, which is, simultaneous relationships without them ever intersecting. And that was their preference, and that's totally fine. For me, I like the idea of it being more communal, of being, there being more friendships involved, because we're all on the same team. Like, a person that cares for my partner, I would like to be friends with them because we're both trying to care for the same person. That can be handy. And when you were talking earlier about like resources and things like that, it's always nice to have a backup person. Like, if your partner's sick and you can't be with them constantly, but they need to be taken care of, if they have another partner who is also there for their best intentions, more power to us. I like the community aspect is really a big thing for me. But yeah, what other terms you got? Because I know there's a ton of them.
Oh, gee. I don't know. Brittany, you have any term questions?
Well, I don't know if I have a term, but I think like the short of what you just said is that metamors do not have to be friendly or also romantically or sexually invested in each other, that they can just kind of be their own thing. And I think a lot of people think that if your partner has a partner, then those partners are partners, and all of the lines go across that polycule thing.
For sure. And that is an option. Like I said, there's so much nuance and so much choosing of what each relationship looks like. And that extends not just to partners, but that extends to metamors too. Like, if my metamor, let's say I had a metamor that was also interested in dating me, that's a conversation. We are, as non-monogamous people, should be very focused on freedom and consent. So me consenting to have a friendship with a metamor it's a very intentional move. It's a conversation that happens. My partner asked me prior if I wanted to meet her, and then set up a group text, and we were talking about trauma bonding. It's nothing really happens without having those conversations first, right? Mm-hmm. And what those relationships and the dynamics of each independent relationship looks like are completely up to the people that are in them.
Well, that was going to lead me into my next question, Kelly, and this is a loaded question, and I fully know it is, but how do some of the relationships work typically? And I think you started with, like, it depends on the people involved.
Right. It entirely depends on the people involved. Relationship dynamics, that's incredibly personal to each person, right? Like, we all want and need different things out of relationships. With non-monogamy, with relationship anarchy, we get to decide what that looks like, because we're not coming from a place where this has been scripted into us. There's a bunch of brilliant books about polyamory, but there's no like how-to guide. Like nobody started teaching us what these relationships look like from birth, right? Like with monogamy. So it really is super nuanced. My relationship dynamic, currently I practice non-hierarchical polyamory, which means that no one has veto power. So the ability to be like, no, I don't want you to date that person, or you need to stop dating that person. That's not something that exists in my relationships. And it also means that no one is necessarily, everyone has choice, right? And everyone is able to consent to everything. We are very open with people about what our relationship looks like, so that when new people coming in, they can recognize, whatever that was. But right now, currently, I have a partner who is local, and I recently had a breakup. So we're going through that. And he has a very casual long distance partner. And he just started talking to someone new. So it's really kind of dependent on the people. Like, I'm not a person personally who's going to go out and have a handful of partners. I don't have the emotional bandwidth for that. Like I said earlier, I'm a very introverted person. So I have date night 2 nights a week. When I did have a previous partner, we had a date night once a week too, like it really is super dependent on what you need, and very much scheduled in alone time, because that is super important, especially when you're kind of, I don't want to say managing, because we do not manage other people's emotions, but when you are kind of having to consider other people's emotions all the time, it can be exhausting, and there needs to be some self time.
Absolutely. And so I think my part B of that question, as you mentioned, hierarchical, what does that mean for our listeners of having a hierarchical non-monogamous dynamic?
Right. So we talk about hierarchy a lot when it comes to couples who are married. So there is a ranking system for some people. Like, they have a primary partner. Primary partner is just the person that they spend the majority of their time with. They have the most investments in, I guess is a good way of saying it. Like, they financial investments, they might have kids together, they probably live together, like they get more time, they get more energy, they get more resources. Those people can then have secondary partners or tertiary partners. Really just depends on what kind of style they're using, right? A lot of times there is the ability to like call a close on the relationship, or like take a pause from non-monogamy. And primary partners can do that sort of thing. There is a lot of debate in the non-monogamous community about whether hierarchical polyamory is ethical, because it does have that veto power. It does have, one person has couples privilege, which is a thing we talk about often. There's more invested in that relationship, so it kind of gets placed at a higher level, right? And then the other side of that debate is, well, if the secondary person is coming in and consents to that, there are ethical ways of doing hierarchical polyamory. Not having veto power, not having one person have more of a say in decisions that include or that like impact everyone. So as far as non-hierarchical, just the opposite of that, right? Like, my partners they're not ranked. I have a partner that I've been with for a much longer amount of time. But he doesn't have the ability to say, oh, I don't want you to date that person. I mean, outside of what we've already agreed to. Like, I was just joking with him yesterday that he is not allowed to date. Okay, obviously this is not ethical in any way, shape, or form, but I was just joking, and I was like, you cannot date my clients. because I seem to be, well, if I get any more polyamorous clients, it's really limiting my dating pool here, guys.
And that's when you can send them to me.
Right. We need to. That's true. Culturally, we sometimes want to go with a therapist we believe will be able to fully understand us and not judge us. Obviously, that's pretty normal. So I can see if somebody finds out that you are, they're going to refer their friends or whoever to you. So that
very much so.
I think that that can cause more issues that get into therapy and counseling boundaries. So I really feel like you've covered this really well. It's a very what I've enjoyed learning so far is just how in depth some of the polyamorous and non-monogamy folks take this nuances in conversation, in their communication, in their ability to understand each other, and it's really interesting to me. I'm so glad we got past the myth and facts stereotype part of this podcast.
Oh, I do just want to say though, one of the myths and facts that y'all didn't touch on.
Oh, yes.
Well, you did touch on it, but I missed this opportunity to make this very valid point. We constantly hear it's all about sex, right? But the fact is 95% communication. I talk about talking about feelings so much more than I have in my entire life. So many feelings talks.
I love that. I wanted to ask about, just without too much, because this could be a whole nother 3-hour conversation, but I want to make sure, just why is the United States society so afraid of non-monogamous relationships? Why is this so controversial? Could you kind of give us both a little bit of insight?
Because it's scary, duh.
They're scary. Why? Why are they scary? Tell me more.
I mean, I'm going to have Kelly answer this as well, but I think that for a lot of people, what they don't know scares them, point blank, period. Ignorance, and also not being curious enough to look at resources, ask questions, do internet searches. What people don't know scares them.
I think that's a really good point, but I'm about to go really radical on y'all. So
please do. I'm here for
a hot second. I think that the reason that this is not all my original thought too, must give credit to all of the lovely researchers that I have been reading. Monogamy is a capitalist patriarchal function. It put women specifically in certain roles, and it let men have a certain amount of power. Anything that doesn't look like that challenges that, is detrimental to our societal norms, right? Like if I am part of a polycule and we have, let's say, we just have one lawnmower, right? Like this is a ridiculous little tip that my partner was giving me the other day, but like we only need one lawnmower between 4 houses. Everybody doesn't need to own a lawnmower, right?
Resources.
Anything that involves the sharing of resources, our society does not love. It also very much allows women to be more open sexually. There is a lot of room for sex positivity in non-monogamy. And that is a thing that our culture does not enjoy. The fact that I am out and getting my needs met, whatever those needs may be, really puts a kink in those plans. Sorry for the pun, but it is, the nuclear family was designed for a purpose. Also, the idea of the religious connotations that the society has, right? Like marriage is a religious thing. The idea that marriage is 2 people, even though there's a ton of non-monogamy in religion, right? Like the Bible is full of it. It didn't work out for keeping women in check in a way in society, when this country was starting, to have relationships that didn't look like that. I really could just talk all day long about how this is another system of keeping people, particularly femme-presenting people, in their place. And also, historically, you look at it, there is this whole thing that I was just reading about where the nuclear family came from, right? And it's like comes out of men needing to know that their children are theirs. So like, because we are a patrilineal society, right? And everything goes down through men. Back in the day, people didn't get married for a very long time in history. And then when they did, it was so that they could assume that their wife wasn't having sex with other men in the community, so that they could actually know that those were their heirs. And that is where all of that stemmed from. And that is ridiculous to me.
And also treaties and property and alliances and diplomacy. So the fun part about learning about these things is if people actually go investigate the origins and we look up sociology, anthropology, research.
For sure.
Everything that you are currently enjoying in your life has an origin, right? Of some degree. And obviously, historically and culturally, we can trace those. And that is what I love about deconstruction, is learning about these things, because I didn't even know that reason. I mean, I knew there was like the control reason. I knew there was the religious reason. I knew that there was like this whole peace treaty stuff. And like in the Bible, there's so much non-monogamy going on in the Old Testament. And, if you look at, have you ever read a book on Roman history just for fun?
No.
Well, just in Roman and Greek times, people would be married for like political sort of tax reasons and maybe religious reasons. Although their religion wasn't, it depends on which religion we're talking about and what era of Rome we're talking about. But in the early times, people would be having quote unquote affairs or sex at the temple or sex during war times with, like for instance, men at war would have sex with each other. Or if they found a village, they'd rape people. Like it was not how things are today at all, right? And yet we've inherited certain norms from those times, and we've sort of piled cultural tropes on them over the years for various reasons. And that's where it gets so confusing for, I think, some folks who are just starting to deconstruct or just starting to learn about these things, is there's so many. I mean, gosh, you have to go backwards. Like, how was marriage 30 years ago? How was it 40 years ago? What did it look like then? What cultural influences at the time were influencing these sort of things that we take for granted? And that's the problem. We take
it's the compulsory part of compulsory monogamy. I was listening to a podcast, and Dr. Kim Tallbear was the guest on it, and she was talking about decolonizing sex. Mm-hmm. And she is an Indigenous person. And so she really looks at non-monogamy through a lens of decolonization. And what she said is you can only truly say you choose monogamy if you have to fight for it in a non-monogamous society. Otherwise, you're just doing it because that's the norm. Non-monogamous people, we are currently having to actually fight to have the relationships that we want to have, because it is not part of the norm. And the norm stems from all of these outdated systems and outdated practices that we haven't caught up.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, this could go so far into personal discovery and cultural discovery. And
for sure.
One of the things I was talking about, this is completely off topic. I'm going to reel us back in. I'm giving you both a primer to reel me back in. But I was talking yesterday to my partner about travel and how if you don't just go on like a tour bus or some sort of, contrived travel situation, or that you can actually, when you travel to a different society or a different country or a different place that you're not used to, it challenges a lot of your assumptions that you may not even realize you have about how to live, and how you should live and where you should live and what you should eat and what sort of religion you might practice or not practice, whatever. And so I think it's just interesting how in the United States, and everywhere, but just in general, to figure out that you have made choices you weren't even conscious of, right? Or choices have been made for you. And then what do you do about that? Is this important to you? Is this not important to you? And in this context, I think most of us can say, and I can say at my age, at least, I don't know about the young folks, but I didn't know there was any other option. If there was an option, it was I knew that it came with really bad consequences, or like fear-based, like, or sort of, culturally. You were definitely dissuaded from anything outside of heteronormative behavior, with like horror stories or just shame or some sort of thing like that. And I think today there's been so many people. We can put some resources in the show notes of books to read and just different ways to look at things and to see how much you've been influenced or not influenced by your culture.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, as a person that really likes to question things and has been doing so from a pretty young age, like I questioned my way out of religion. I questioned my way out of like being straight. I question, I have a lot of really big opinions on things. Until a few years ago, I had never thought about why I was having relationships the way I was having them, and that there were other options. And a lot of this process has been that deconstructing, and it is wonderful self-growth. And so even, like I said earlier, for even the times when there is some jealousy that pops up or something uncomfortable or a conversation that needs to be had, that's the rewarding bit for me, is that I have learned so much more about myself through this process and had such big strides in personal growth that, it really feels like an authentic way for me to be.
Mm-hmm. I feel like to summarize what both of you are saying is that if we're talking specific, all of our dynamics in the world, but when it comes to non-monogamy, we have to also look at of what systems it stems from. And I'm hearing that when you look at colonialism, capitalism, consumerism, racism, religion, that it all stems from those big things, at least particularly in the United States.
For sure.
Yeah, I think, if you grow up here, you don't know the water you're swimming in. And I think that it's important to learn the water that you're swimming in, and understand your context. And then I think then you can decide what to do about it. I think the first step is just learning.
That's non-monogamy 101, is finding out your why. If you are confident in your why, it's going to make this journey so much easier. If your why is, something kind of like, I want to keep this partner, or it's not something that is core to you, it's going to be a harder journey.
Absolutely. And I feel like we really have talked about a lot of the things we wanted to get to. There's so much more we could discuss. Obviously, we touched a little bit about people weaponizing terms of polyamory and non-monogamy. I think that just goes with the territory of anything. I did want to ask Brittani, and I know Kelly, you're possibly going to get involved in this as well, about the little program that you created, you've been working on. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So there was a bunch of need in our community. It started with people who wanted a premarital program that wasn't tied to any religion. A lot of our faith-based centers in our area do have some kind of premarital counseling program or a marriage program that was very heavily faith-based. And so I started looking at making programs so other people who were interested in being engaged and getting, premarital counseling done in a way. And then what I heard from our other community members, so our LGBTQ plus community and our non-monogamous community, is that we want something too, that a lot of people won't do family therapy or won't do quotes couples therapy end quotes with non-monogamous folks. And so I really been working hard to develop a 8 to 12 week program that our non-monogamous folks can kind of invest into. And with Kelly's advice and support and help, I think we've got something down that's pretty good. So in 8 to 12 weeks, we go through a variety of things. Usually those first 6 sessions is strictly skill building, a lot of talking about emotions, a lot of talking about talking. So we make sure we get those down. And then based on whoever consents to participating in our non-monogamy relationship programs, we might also be talking about things like navigating gender roles, implicit bias, coming out, family dynamics, microaggressions, codependency versus co-regulation, autonomy, leisure time, scheduling, all of these other dynamics that are going to be very specific to those people that are consenting to that non-monogamous relationship program.
Yes, thank you so much for letting us know about that. And obviously, anybody who is, a non-monogamous identifying person could obviously get individual counseling. That's pretty, normal for folks to have that. I do think that, unfortunately, we've had a lot of discrimination against people that are in those relationships in the therapy community. And so Health for Life counseling, we accept all people, and we are very big on learning about implicit bias and cultural differences. So obviously suss out your therapist and make sure you feel that you're safe, whether it's at Health for Life or any other place, that you're in a safe place. Family therapy, it gets iffy because of the whole insurance companies getting involved and all of that. And so, it can be tough if you're in a non-monogamous relationship to get into family therapy. I do know some families have successfully done that of various contexts. But this program was made specifically to bypass the insurance medical care Western model and be able to provide a space for people that were interested, whether it be one or multiple people, and really focusing on the communication and all of these things you talked about in a safe space. And that is what Brittany's been offering Health for Life counseling. Some other therapists are going to also get involved in this and kind of throw their own flavor into it. But it's a way to really, especially if you're new to it, or maybe new to tune-up, that's sort of the way I see it, and participate in that. I'm excited about it.
Me too. It's been, I've had a few relationship dynamics already pass through. And as long as people are committed and driven to staying on task, doing their homework in between sessions, I've already seen some really great things happening. So I'm excited to get some polyamorous and or non-monogamous kitchen table, whatever dynamic is comfortable with those people involved, as long as they're consenting to the program. And because I think it's gonna be really great. I'm excited.
As a poly person in this city, I do want to say how important it is that there are safe spaces like that for polyamorous couples or for relationships to go to, couples, whatever spice we're putting on it. Because it was really difficult to find one. So I'm loving that this is something that we're able to offer.
Absolutely. And I am going to make sure that not only is the program in the show notes, but I'm going to make sure that Kelly and Brittany give me some resources for people that want to learn more about this. If this is something in terms of what is non-monogamy, what are resources and people out there that can speak into your life if that is something you are interested in or already involved in, so that we can get more education. I believe that education is a way for people to have power in their lives and to be able to reclaim power that maybe has been stripped from them. And so that is why we do this podcast. And I'm really excited and so thankful for Kelly and Brittany coming on here and sharing their time. And Kelly, sharing your own experience and expertise. I feel like that is very brave, and I appreciate you.
To be fair, my partner told me that he just wanted me to come on here and rant about him for 15 minutes being wonderful. So, I'm happy to share my personal stories, but that was
Well, you can let him know that I do think he's wonderful. I have met him, and we can say that for the record on air. So,
thank you for having me.
Yes, my pleasure. My pleasure.
And likewise, Paul. Thanks for having me as well.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. And and people have questions, they can check out the resources and share this podcast with your friends. Thanks so much. And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician podcast. If you're enjoying this show, please share it with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. Or take just a minute to give us a rating on iTunes. As most of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. My colleagues and I have started a nonprofit called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they act violently. It is a bold effort to save lives and curb violence by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website, www.violencepreventionhotline.org. Join us online by signing our petition on the website, sharing the website with your network of people, donating to the cause if you like, and you can now even write your congressperson from our website with a simple form. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you are a therapist looking for ethical and excellent medical billing services, check out therapistbillingservicesllc.com. That's www.therapistbillingservicesllc.com. Billing services created by therapists for therapists. If you're looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can provide you the 20 hours you need to become EMDRIA certified. I have groups online and in person, and I do individual consultation. Just send me a message at the website and I'll get back to you. If you want to get trained in EMDR therapy, check out the great training opportunities with EMDR Training Solutions. I've worked with them before and they are phenomenal, so register today. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment at a local counseling center in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area at Health for Life Counseling and the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based on the literature they have read and the experience in their fields, this should not be viewed as a definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please dial 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. You can also text 741-741 and a live trained crisis counselor will respond. Did you know you could support your local bookstore by shopping at www.bookshop.org? You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting local brick and mortar businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not a member of your national or local therapy organizations such as the American Counseling Association or the American Mental Health Counselors Association, please get involved, at least pay the dues. It will help the lobbyists in our field keep us from becoming gig workers. And of course, there's the bonus of increasing mental health education around the United States and helping people understand what counseling is and promoting best practices within our profession. Until next time, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.